Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're diving into the history of silver and how it shaped a nation.
Yeah, a single metal can have such a profound impact. Really is remarkable.
It really is. It's intertwined with emperors, fortunes made and lost, and one merchant who makes today's billionaires look like paupers.
We're talking about Hauqua, right?
Exactly, how call. But before we get to him, let's set the stage. It's 1581, high in the Andes Mountains, and there's this discovery. Huge veins of pure silver.
Not just another gold rush, though, is it?
Not at all. This silver, it finds its biggest fan thousands of miles away, the Emperor of China.
You see, the emperor, he had just mandated that all taxes be paid in silver.
Interesting. So this wasn't just about simplifying taxes, right?
Not just about making things easier, no, it was about control, consolidating power,
Hmm.
and, it sent shockwaves across the globe.
Makes sense.
Silver essentially became more valuable than gold in China.
Supply and demand 101, right?
Mm.
So while the Americas are in a frenzy,
Mm-hmm.
ships are racing across the Pacific, all chasing this silver.
That's where Hauqua steps in.
Our incredibly wealthy merchant. Tell me more about this guy.
Hauqua, he was a businessman extraordinaire, working out of Canton, at the time, the only port open to Westerners.
A real gatekeeper.
He knew, he understood. To succeed, he had to bridge these two worlds. A West that craved China's tea, silks, porcelain, all that.
In China, they needed that silver.
Exactly.
He becomes the middleman, this connector, and the fortune he amassed, almost impossible to fathom today. I mean, there are stories. During a fire in Canton, silver melted out of his vaults.
Those stories, they aren't just colorful tales. They highlight how much silver he controlled.
I mean, they say he was wealthier than the Rothschilds,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't just about hoarding wealth, was it? He was investing it too.
He understood the world was changing. He saw beyond China's borders.
He's not just sitting on this mountain of silver, is he? Where is he investing?
The U.S., he saw potential in America, especially the Industrial Revolution that was starting up.
Wow. Well, others were wary of the West. He's going all in.
He poured money into railroads, factories, investments his contemporaries wouldn't touch. It was risky, but it paid off.
Makes you wonder, what would he think of today's global economy?
It does. His story challenges how we think about this period. Here's a Chinese merchant at a time when China was pretty closed off, investing in the nation that would soon challenge its very dominance.
And that's where our story takes a bit of a turn. Because as Hauqua built bridges with trade, something else was coming into the picture. Opium. It's a real shift, isn't it? We go from these savvy investments and global aspirations right into, well, a much darker chapter.
It really is. I mean, Hauqua built his fortune on trade, yeah, but others saw a different kind of opportunity.
Because while China had its tea and porcelain, the West, especially Britain, they had found something else China wanted, even if they had to create the demand. Opium.
This wasn't just a few smuggled chests either. The opium trade. It just exploded in the 19th century. In 1767, about 1,000 chests of opium came in from India. By 1838, that number was 40,000.
40,000. It's hard to imagine that much opium flooding into China. This wasn't just business anymore, it was creating a national crisis.
It really was. Opium addiction, it became rampant. And not just among the poor. Officials, scholars, even people in the emperor's own court were addicted.
This once rare substance, it becomes a way to escape the pressures of a changing world.
Exactly. And all that silver that China had built up, it's flowing right back out, this time to feed this addiction.
It's a vicious cycle.
You see the rise of men like William Jardine and James Matheson. They weren't small-time crooks. They industrialized the opium trade. Faster ships, networks all along the coast, all to get their product into China.
These men were ruthless, weren't they? Making fortunes while China crumbled.
There were whispers, even in the West, about the morality of it all. Jardine, he was called a dreadful man, overflowing with profits from opium.
But whispers weren't enough.
Yeah.
This pursuit of profit above everything else, it led to war.
It was bound to happen. In 1839, Emperor Dezguang, he was desperate. He sent his most trusted official, Commissioner Lin Zexu, to Canton to deal with this.
Commissioner Lin, he sounds like a true hero, taking on these powerful forces.
He didn't back down. He arrived in Canton and got right to work. Dealers arrested, opium pipes seized, and then he issued this challenge to the British. Hand over all your opium.
I bet the British love that.
Oh, they weren't happy. They claimed Lin had no right to take their property, so Lin blockaded the Pearl River, trapping them in their trading posts. The tension was incredible.
Our friend Hauqua, he must have been sweating a little. War would ruin everything he'd built.
He even faced death threats for his role in all this. But this was bigger than one man or even one fortune. Lin was determined. He actually forced the British to surrender almost 20,000 chests of opium. Imagine that, a fortune in itself.
So what'd he do with it all? Did he send it back?
He destroyed it. Picture this. These huge vats filled with water and lime, chests being broken open, the opium dissolving. Then that toxic mess flushed right into the Pearl River.
What a gesture. A symbolic victory, at least, right?
A victory, but a small one. Because the British, they saw this as a humiliation. They wanted compensation. And when China refused, it was their excuse for war. The First Opium War showed just how far behind China had fallen.
The British Navy, all steam and firepower.
They outmatched the Chinese completely. It was a crushing defeat for China. And the treaty they signed, the Treaty of Nanking in 1842, changed everything. China had to give Hong Kong to Britain, open more ports to trade, and pay a huge indemnity, in silver, of course.
So not only did they lose land and control over their own trade, they had to empty their dwindling silver reserves to pay for it all.
It was the beginning of what China calls its century of humiliation. A long, painful period of internal struggles, foreign interference, and the loss of their standing in the world.
It's hard to imagine, isn't it? This empire, this center of the world, really brought down by the very thing that once made it strong.
Yeah, silver. That's a heck of a story. But even in the face of these defeats, there were those who still believed in China, who had a vision for a different future.
People like Prince Gong, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was practically thrown to the wolves, wasn't he?
Yeah.
How old was he when the British showed up with their warships? 27. What did he want for China?
Prince Gong, he was a realist. He knew clinging to the past wouldn't help. He saw what the West was doing, their technology, their industry. China had to catch up.
Yeah.
Especially their military.
That's what led to the self-strengthening movement, right? Trying to, well, self-strengthen. That couldn't have been easy, changing a system as old as China's.
It was a massive undertaking, and Gong, he faced opposition right from the start. There were those in the court who saw these reforms, as turning their backs on China, on their values, giving in to the West.
They were trying to modernize without losing their identity. That's something people still struggle with.
It is, and one of the people trying to navigate this was actually British, Robert Hart.
A Brit helping to rebuild China. That's surprising, given everything that happened.
Hart's story, though, it's kind of remarkable, shows you how individuals can bridge divides. He ran the Chinese Maritime Customs Service for almost 50 years, but he wasn't like other colonial types. He spoke Mandarin, studied Chinese culture, really admired the Chinese people.
He sounds more like, I don't know, a diplomat than anything else.
He was. He believed that everyone benefited from a strong China, even if it meant going against his own government sometimes. Under him, the customs service, it flourished. It was efficient, and it brought in much-needed money for the government.
It's ironic, a British-run service supporting the Chinese government while other Western powers were trying to tear the country apart.
It was a strange time. But even with people like Prince Gong and Robert Hart trying, China couldn't escape its dependence on silver.
Because as China was modernizing, the rest of the world was moving towards the gold standard.
Exactly. And that's where TV Soon comes in, finance minister in the 1930s. And he's facing a crisis.
This is the guy they called a financial genius, the one who was on the cover of Time magazine.
He was brilliant, no question. Soon, he knew sticking to silver when the world was going gold, it was dangerous. He unified China's currency, which was a feat in itself. But even he couldn't overcome what happened next.
What happened?
The Silver Purchase Act, 1934, in the United States.
Hold on. Something happens in America, and it cripples China's economy. How does that even happen?
It just shows you how connected the world was becoming. The Silver Purchase Act, it was supposed to help American silver producers during the Depression drive up the price of silver.
Sounds good in theory.
Right. But then, anyone in China who had silver, they all rushed to sell.
And that drained the country's reserves even more.
It was a disaster. The same metal that had flowed into China, built empires, it was now gushing out, leaving chaos behind, hyperinflation, banks failing, people hurting.
But America tries to fix its economy, and it ends up destroying China's silver-based system.
It was the end. In 1935, China finally gave up the silver standard. The end of an era.
It's incredible. From emperors to its downfall. But we know China. They always bounce back. And today, they're a global powerhouse again. And you know what's interesting? They're the world's biggest importer of silver now.
It's true. But this time it's not about taxes or empires. It's about solar panels, electronics, things like that. The modern world.
It makes you think, doesn't it? What can we learn from all of this? As China tries to expand its influence again, with things like the Belt and Road Initiative, are there parallels? Could history repeat itself? These are the questions we'll leave you with. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the story of silver and its impact on China and ultimately the world.